Today's project is an art journal page created on behalf of PaperArtsy.co.uk using my lyrics journal, which is a 9x12 Strathmore visual. The first step here is blending the fresco finish acrylic paints that I've chosen, and I'm using a piece of Ranger cut and dry foam for this purpose. The idea is to create a band of horizontal colour that's blended across the page. So I started using the Zesty Zing, which is a translucent yellow, and I'm blending that both above and below with Beech Hut, which is also a translucent colour. Now, because of the nature of translucent colours and the depth I want to create, you'll see that I need to build up several layers of paint until I've got the effect that I'm looking for. This next colour is Eggplant, which is a very deep purple colour. And again, I'm blending this both above and below the previous colour until I'm happy with both the level of blending and the depth. And you can see here I'm going back over the blue and the yellow to try and add to that depth and continue with the blending process. I might add also that Eggplant is a semi-opaque, so a much smaller amount of that colour is actually needed to create the same depth as the previous colours. This last paint now is Inky Pool, and I'm just adding some of that here and there just to darken the eggplant in places and add more of the blue tone to that colour. Now I'm using Silk's Acrylic Glaze in Ginger Flower, which is a shimmery deep magenta colour, and I'm applying a very thin layer over the darkest purple and blue colours at the top and the bottom of the page. I find that dabbing the paint with my fingers is the most effective way to blend such a small amount of paint, so that is what you can see me doing here. And the reason I'm adding the Silk's Glaze is because I want to stamp over this area and it's presently very dark. So if I'm applying a paint that contains mica, this is going to reflect some light back onto these darkest areas, which will then allow some of that stamping to show up. Also, I do intend to use the magenta colour on other elements of the page that will be added later, so it will have the additional function of making the page appear more cohesive. So now I'm going to stamp onto the page and continue building up the background interest. And for this I've chosen two different text stamps, both from PaperArtsy's Ink and Dog range. This first one is from Petals Plate 3. And I always tend to use archival ink when stamping over acrylics because it's permanent and it dries particularly quickly. In this case I've chosen Archival Deep Purple. Obviously you can use other inks for this purpose as long as it's suitable for a non-porous surface. StazOn springs to mind as a good alternative. So here is the second stamp I'm using for the background. This time it's from Petals Plate 1, and this is a finer, more compact style of text, so it's going to fill in some of those gaps between the first stamp, which was a much larger and bolder style of writing. Next is a final layer of stamping for the background, this time using stamps from PaperArtsy's Joffrey collection, and I'm going to use plate 13. I'm switching to Brilliance ink because I want to use gold, and this is again for the purpose of reflecting light over those darker areas of the design. And I'm using the stamp without an acrylic block in much the same manner as the previous ones, so you end up with a more random and imperfect design that blends into those previous layers more easily. Here I've cut some circles using a Spellbinders die, and I'm going to paint these with Zesty Zing, which is one of the paints I used as part of the page background. It's a lightweight 160 gram cardstock, as I prefer not to make my pages too bulky, though obviously this isn't that much of a problem in a spiral bound journal. Again, here I'm using archival ink and stamp over the circles, this time in magenta, and I've gone back to one of the text stamps that was used on the background for this purpose. I'm also edging the circles using a piece of Ranger cut and dry foam and the same magenta ink. Next, I'm using another plate from the Joffy collection. This is plate 22, and it includes some really nice whimsical flowers in 3 different sizes. So I'm going to use the same 160 gram cardstock that I used for the circles, and this time black archival ink, just to stamp out a couple of each. Now I've gone back to my journal page and the circles that I cut out and painted, and I'm just going to arrange these where I think I might want to stick them down. I'm using Soft Gel Matte Medium by Golden as my adhesive, and I've chosen this because the elements in this area have a matte finish and so does the gel medium. So it's not going to add any kind of shine or gloss finish where I don't want it, and many other adhesives will do that. Obviously though, you can use whatever you've got and whatever is your own personal preference for this purpose. Now I'm going back to the flowers that I stamped and starting to add some colour to those. So in the centre here is the Zesty Zing, which I've used throughout. And for the petals, I'm going to use Silk's Acrylic Glazes again. So here I have the magenta pink that I used on the page background right at the start of the project. And this is called Ginger Flower. And I'm going to paint the majority of the petals in this colour. And then Snapdragon is the purple colour, and I'm going to add that just to the edges of the flowers, as you can see here. The next thing is to cut the flowers out, and I'm using some detail scissors for this. These particular ones are by Pergamano, and they have a curved edge and a very fine point, so they're really good for cutting out intricate pieces. To glue the flowers onto the page, I've chosen gloss medium this time, and the reason I've chosen this is because the flowers were painted with the Silk's acrylics and these were a shimmer paint, so I don't want to use the matte medium that I did before, just in case it gets onto those petals and it would interfere with the reflection and shine of the mica in those paints. Here I'm using a baby wipe just to help me get rid of some of the excess gloss medium, because obviously the circles underneath were painted with the fresco finish, which is matte, so I don't want too much of that gloss medium to go onto there. Now I'd like to create some borders for my page, so I'm going back to the Joffy plate 13, and there's a very nice border strip included in that set. I'm stamping it out using archival black, and because my journal is quite large, I do need to stamp this several times. They are going to be easy to fit together though, because it is a continuous design. Next, paint the border strips, and for this I am again using the Zesty Zing Fresco paint. And because I've chosen a translucent paint, you can still see the lines of the stamped image fairly clearly. Here I'm using matte gel medium to adhere 2 of the border strips together, and then that will make them long enough to cover the length of my journal. Now I want to generate some text from my page, and I'm going to use 2 different PaperArtsy stamp sets for this. The first one is the larger of the 2 stamp sets I'm going to use, and this is Joffy Plate 21. And again I'm using archival black ink and the 160g smooth white cardstock that I used previously in the project. The second plate of stamps that I'm using for my text is from PaperArtsy's Ink and the Dog range, and it is Words Plate 2. And I'm also using the same archival ink and cardstock as previously. This plate actually comes as a sheet of uncut rubber, so you can either cut out all the letters and use it as an alphabet as I've done, or else you can leave them as one sheet of rubber and use it as a background stamp. And I like the versatility of that option. And here is the stamped text on the page. It's a mixture of both stamp sets, and I've used a paper trimmer to cut out the words so that I can arrange them where I want on the page, and I'm gluing them down into place using matte gel medium. Now I'm going to add colour over the text. I'm using a mixture of satin glaze with Zesty Zing. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to add additional colour inside those letters, and I don't want it to be too contaminated by the yellow of the Zesty Zing. So even though it's a translucent colour, I'm being mindful that some of it will be transferred to the top colour. Now to add some colour to both the border and the letters, and for this I'm going back to the Silks Glaze. So this is the ginger flower, which I used, if you remember, on the background right at the start and also on the flowers. And the brush I'm using here is a detail brush produced by a company called Art Master. This here is the first layer obviously, but I do end up painting 2 layers of the silks over this border and indeed over the letters too, just to make sure that the colour was true to what it showed in the jar rather than the orangey colour, which is how it appeared after the first coat due to that yellow being painted underneath it. And here you can see how that paint looks after those 2 layers of the silks. Next I'm taking a Micron pen to outline most of the stamped images that appear on the page. It just makes them pop a little bit. So I'm starting with the text that was stamped out, and then you'll see that I do go on and complete the same process of outlining on the border and around the flowers also. Here I'm using an old credit card and some of the silks paint in ginger flower just to define the text and give it a sort of grungy border. It's something I do quite frequently on my journal pages and I really like how it looks. Now I'm taking some Stickles glitter glue, this is purple colour, and I'm just applying this to the edges of the flower petals just to add some sparkle to the page. I do like to add glitter to my journal pages. I'm also adding some magenta so that these 2 colours are going to complement the colours that are already painted on those flower petals. And this is the final step of the project. I'm using here a Posca paint pen just to add some detail around the circles and make them stand out a little bit more. And I've selected this rather than the Micron pen that I used earlier, just because the nib is that little bit broader, so you're going to see those dots a little bit more. So here's the finished journal page. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully it's given you some ideas on how you might use some of these products and techniques in your own work.